everyone. Come on in, come on in. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can jump into this class. Y'all, we have so much good stuff going on today. We are going to be learning all about why proficiency cannot wait until next year. This is a really popular topic. People were jumping all over to get the link to this class. So I know a lot of you aren't able to make it live because you're teaching right now or you're in a different time zone. We have people from all over who are going to be watching this class. So hey, from wherever you're at, if you're in the live class now, jump in and let me know where you're watching from and let me know that everything's working as well. Let me get this bad boy started. I'm going to check and make sure that the tech's working on my end as well. But I'm so excited for this one, y'all. I'm not going to lie. This is my favorite one. I've done 4 classes so far this week, but this is my favorite one because this is the one that really needs to be talked about. Let me just see and make sure that everything's going well here. All right, good. Looks good. Oh, hey, I see some people are in it. All right, come on in. Hi. Let me check and make sure that I can see the comments. Oh, good. All right, glad. Hi, Erin. I'm so glad that you're here. Y'all, this is a juicy one. I mean, have you been talking about this with your colleagues? This was like all I could talk about while I was still teaching for like 5 years. And now that we have this huge challenge in front of us as educators, talking about everything that's going on with how on earth we're going to manage this challenge of teaching during a pandemic, I honestly think that instead of being put on the back burner, this topic is more important than ever. Hi, Anna or Anna, tell me how to pronounce your name. Names are really important to me. We got West Virginia in the house, nice. And we got Tara watching from Oregon, sweet, really cool. Oh, so glad you guys are here. I knew this would be a good topic. I knew this is juicy. All right, so this is not going to be a class that is just where I am talking, okay? Now that I've finally figured out how all of this stuff works, I am modeling for you exactly what it looks like to learn on the fly for virtual teaching, right? What's up? Oh, Erin, you're from Illinois, killing it. So I am working with a couple different tech things going on here. What I'm using right now that you could also use with your classes in case you want this tip is I'm using Zoom to stream live on Facebook, but the way that it works is that I can't see the comments on my screen. So I got to like chill over here on my phone to look as well. Anna, okay, cool. Good. Glad that I figured that out. Thanks for letting me know, Anna. So, of course, while I jab about that, the reason that I'm telling you that is because you're probably going to face a lot of new technology. And I want you to know this is not a brag or me tooting my own horn, although I believe that we should honestly, as teachers, do that more, especially as women. We need to be comfortable doing that. But I'm kind of a tech guru. I love technology. I've always been good at it. And it's been something that my department or like even when I wasn't in a department at a school, people would go to me for. And getting used to this streaming live process has been a big push outside of my comfort zone for me. So I know what it feels like to get used to new things. Like we're all in this boat together. So I'm showing up as the best version of myself, doing something that is very new to me. But that's because this new technology, it allows me to do cool things like this. Talk to you. Ooh, Vienna, cool. Oh, hey, Beatrice, what's up? It allows me to do cool things like this, like talk to you and show you this presentation at the same time. So it's worth getting outside of your comfort zone to work with something. But that being said, I want you to follow one of my really guiding principles, which is that there are many different ways that I could have chosen to do the same thing, stream a presentation and watch comments. I chose one method and I found out everything that I could about it, and then I stopped. Okay, you don't go down the technology rabbit hole during virtual teaching. That's my little bonus tip for you. But here's what we're going to talk about today, because I know that many of you are going to be virtual teaching, but the reason that you're here is because you want to hear why proficiency cannot wait until next year. Here's the first thing that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about some background, a little bit of background about me. If you haven't seen me teach before, I'm going to talk about why I'm so passionate about this topic and why we always tend to kind of put proficiency in the corner as world language teachers. Then we're going to talk about why, I know, some of y'all aren't going to believe me, but this is real. I've lived it and I've experienced this, and I am the only person in world language to say this. Promise you. I've been to a lot of trainings. I'm the only person who will say this to you, to your face. Proficiency is easier. It is. It's easier. I've done both. It's easier. And I'm going to tell you some ways that you can make simple changes in the way that you teach that is more proficiency-based, that will make your life easier this year, no matter what model you're working with. Lesson 3 that we're going to work with today is that there is no such thing as a purist, y'all. Okay, there's so many different ways to teach. There are so many different ideas out there, and there are so many methods that work well. The only thing that we're going to talk about is that the one way that doesn't work well, which is unfortunately the most popular. But we're not here to, set fire to the proverbial filing cabinet. That's not what we're about here. So I'm not going to pitch to you an idea that you need to throw out all of your worksheets or your favorite subplans just because they use conjugations. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, it's better to have things that work well and that things that your students like, but that the majority of your practice is based on solid research-based moving your students forward in acquisition. And the fourth thing that we're going to talk about is honestly the most important, that teaching with proficiency and with a culturally and comprehensively rich class is honestly easier when you teach with proficiency, and reaching each student is easier. Let's jump in, because I know y'all can't wait. What we're going to learn today is a sample of Module 2 from Practical Proficiency, which is a course that is open until Sunday. You're going to see a tiny bit of what is in Module 2. This is like a little overview of powerhouse practices of putting the research into practice. So we're not really going to talk about the research today, because today is about putting that research into practice. But all the research is going to be presented in Practical Proficiency. Erin already knows what's up because she's already looking at some of those. I've said this once, I'll say it a million times. When you do better, your students do better. It's not the other way around. That is why I created Practical Proficiency, and that is why I believe in it so much. It is not a good idea to invest a bunch of time and go down a rabbit hole or completely overhaul everything that you're doing for the sake of your students, because honestly, at the end of the day, they're not going to care. And at the end of the day, it's just going to burn you out. Ask me how I know. Like, I've done proficiency a couple different ways because I've done it for 3 years. And the most successful way that it worked for not only me, but for my students was the year when I had the least amount of time to do it. So I'm not just saying that, it's something that I've experienced and lived in my own life. So let me tell you exactly who I am and why I have the gall to say that to you. Hi, I'm Devin, and I freaking love teaching. I absolutely love teaching. And the reason that I love teaching is because I love students. Students rock. That's the whole reason that we're here. The reason that I got into teaching is because I'm obsessed with social connection and the power of social connections to be a social force for good. And I believe that being in the thick of it, like that grassroots movement of being with students every day, is the most powerful force for good in the world. I really do. That face-to-face connection with students. All the other stuff with teaching is frankly just okay. And honestly, some of it's a little bleh. Like, there was a lot of teaching stuff that I really didn't like. My favorite part of teaching was lesson planning. Oh my God, I'm obsessed with it. I loved it. I used to spend hours on it, way more than I needed to. but I was really good at it. And it was one of the things that made me a really great teacher. And one of the things that my students always loved about my class. Like I used to give out student surveys at the end of every single semester that always like made me nervous, you know, when you get feedback from your students, because they're honest, like they ain't gonna lie to you. It always made me so nervous, but I did it anyways because I knew it was good for me. But one of the things that they always said is that Miss Gunning's always really well prepared. She's always well planned. She has way too much energy. Like, what the floop is wrong with her? There's always so much going on, but every minute is planned out and it's always good. Cool. All right. Well, I like that. And I'm obsessed with kids. I just love kids. I was an admin wonder child. I really loved to please my administration, and I've worked for both really great administrators and really bad administrators, so I know what both is like. And I was a student favorite. Not saying that to, you know, like throw myself out there as a great teacher, but like I've got the awards to prove it. Like I was definitely a student favorite in the building. And the principal even in one of the bullets below kind of proves that too, is that I was also kind of a troublemaker too. Like I used to make a lot of waves at my school because I used to make a lot of noise about things that I didn't like. And I remember one time specifically, I made a lot of noise about something that was going on in our school that I didn't agree with. And the principal told me about how he said, you know, Devin, I don't want to be mad at you because students love you. They tell me all the time how much they love having you as a teacher, but we got to talk about this one thing. I was like, this is the weirdest meeting I've ever been in. But that was the kind of teacher that I was. I was definitely like, I made a lot of waves, but I like to do the right thing and please my administrators. And it took me a while to get into that role where I was also a troublemaker. So that's the kind of educator that I was. I also consistently worked 70 hours a week, consistently. I worked on weekends. I put off family things, and I put off all kinds of like social not obligations, but like fun things with friends in order to work and grade papers. And I totally lived like the teacher martyr life of, oh, I'm just so teacher tired all the time. But honestly, working 70 hours a week is a choice. It is. It's a choice. And I can tell you that because I've done it both ways. The class that I did yesterday was all about how I went home on time every day for a year and how I became a better teacher because of it. So I can honestly say from the bottom of my heart that that was a choice. It was a bad choice. And I was a better teacher when I worked less. So that was what I came from. And this is why I had to change. The same students in my class for a while were always doing well, like no matter what I tried, like even though I was an engaging teacher, and like, trust me, I also had a lot of problems. Hi, Sign. Oh yeah, I can definitely send you the replay link for that video. It's a good one. Let me write that down, Erin, so I don't forget. I'm gonna drop that link in there to send the replay for, are you looking for the one that how I went home on time every day? Yeah. I'm writing this down because your brain is not a storage bin. It's meant to process things. So writing things down is really helpful. It's not a sign of weakness, y'all. This is something we'll talk about, practical proficiency. How I went home on time every day. I will send you that link. Yeah, girl, I got you. So, train of thought. Oh, the same students were always doing well, no matter what I tried in class. And I certainly was not a perfect teacher. I was definitely the type of teacher who always had a messy room and was a total pain to plan with in a group because I always wanted to try creative ideas and I was always switching my lesson plans at the last minute. That was definitely me. But my strong suit was that I was good at lesson planning. So my students liked class. It was fun and engaging. They were moving around, but they weren't acquiring language. So what I mean by that is there came this really pivotal moment where there was this dreaded speaking final with my Spanish twos, my lovely, lovely Spanish twos. They had to answer 36 questions and they were like picking 6 random ones out of a cup. And we practiced them for 2 weeks using all of my general practice research-based methods. But they didn't do well. Like, it didn't matter what grade they had, they did not do well. And you know why they didn't do well? It wasn't because they didn't know how to answer the question, because we had practiced that. It's because they didn't understand what I was saying. They couldn't interact in the language. They couldn't interact in Spanish. And then this troubled me even further. And those problems that like keep you up at night, those teacher problems. We had that Spanish 3 dilemma where in my school in Spanish 3, it's required that you speak Spanish the entire class period. So either you are listening or you answer in Spanish. So there's no English allowed. And if you speak English, you lose your participation points for the day. Students were doing terribly. Like, the whole school had this horrible aura and reputation of the Spanish 3 dilemma. And it got to the point where a lot of Spanish 3 teachers just stopped enforcing it because students weren't doing well in it. And I thought to myself, if you've gotten to the point where you're 3 years into Spanish and you can't make it without using English in class, that doesn't say anything about the students. That says something about what we're doing. So I started to look into more modern methods using comprehensible input, using communicative language teaching, using proficiency. Honestly, it doesn't really matter what you call it because it's all the same idea. A lot of people call it CI, but that's not really a method, honestly, at the end of the day. It's just what people are familiar with, but it just means that you shift the focus of class from, instead of being about explicit language points, you're teaching students how to work with the language. And it worked really, really well. It was beautiful. And that's another class for another day, how well it worked. It was incredible. And we'll talk more about that later at the end of class during lesson 4. But then this other thing happened. And I'm going to tell you this story because I want you to understand that I did all of these things that I'm going to suggest that you do during the most difficult, the lowest point of my life. I was diagnosed with this crazy thing called intractable migraines. And intractable migraines are different from regular migraines that other people experience in that they don't go away. And mine was even more different because mine has never gone away. I still actually have it and experience it almost every day. And medication and good self-care habits, which is why I'm so passionate about self-care, is the only thing that really keeps the headache out of my head. It was so bad. And actually, it started in March. I'm going to give you the really short version of the story. But March is not a good time for me to teach because March is when virtual school started last year. And March the year before that was when I had to miss 4 full weeks of school. It was terrible. I could not do anything cognitively. I had to just sit on the couch in darkness and just watch life happen around me because of this crazy health thing that came out of nowhere that I had never experienced before in my life, and that we had to figure out as a family for a long time before we even got to any type of medication or treatment that worked for me. And I, of course, ran out of days, when you miss school for 4 weeks. And so even though I was still in a lot of pain and I was getting better, but it still wasn't great, I had to eventually go back. And teach. So it was a really rough experience. I had to teach with the lights off in my room for the rest of the year. It was rough. I also had to keep things really short. I had to ask my students to be quiet during the whole school year. And I taught with a ton of music and games and loud noises. Like, I've always been a bombastic personality, and I had to just sit at my desk and be really quiet and ask students to do very quiet activities. And I absolutely used worksheets for 3 weeks because I didn't know what else to do. I was just suffering and struggling. And I was hospitalized twice during this time period. And I thought to myself, can I keep teaching? Is this even possible? So I quit. And at the end of I stayed through the end of the year because y'all know what that's like when people quit in the middle of the year. Horrible. But I didn't know what to do because teaching is my calling. So I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how I was ever going to figure it out. I looked at other jobs and I just couldn't imagine doing anything different. So as I started to get better over that summer, I found a different job that had at least less preps and less students so that I could go back. And hi, Jane, come on in. I'm waving at you because I'm looking at the comments. Hi, Jane. I'm still getting used to this. But I decided to go back and give it one more good year. And I had, surprisingly enough, I didn't think that this would happen. I had the best teaching year of my life. The best teaching year of my life. And what I'm going to show you today is how I was able to go back to teaching. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. I am not by any means CI or proficiency obsessed, even though that's what I teach. And I'm also not a purist. I just believe that research is just as important as what works for real teachers in real classrooms. And proficiency is the way to go. But I also think that there's a time and a place, just like me, where you kind of have to rely on a few things that might not be the best in order to just get through the day. I do think that that's a reality for teachers. So what I think is more powerful is if you find systems and strategies that you can rely on all year long so that when your ish hits the fan, or if you're teaching in a difficult circumstance like I was last year, where I was still facing constant migraines. And then in March, when schools closed and I had to figure out how I was still going to do virtual teaching, I still was able to use these methods because I set up some really strong foundations and boundaries for myself. And that's what we talk all about in Practical Proficiency. I use these methods during school closures for 4 months, and I know that you can too. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And this is something that's really common in the language community, is the idea of putting proficiency in the corner. That is why, at the end of the day, you find two camps in the world language community. You have the camp of the very much, I don't even know if I want to call it the traditional teacher, because it's actually the more prevalent version of teaching, but the practice, the present, practice, and assess model. And that could be doing all kinds of different things. You might have your own curriculum, you might have a textbook, or you might have a district created curriculum, whatever it is, but it's still the same jazz. It's present, practice, and assess. That's the model that most of us use. And even though there's no research to back up the present, practice, and assess model, that's what most of us do. And we continually put off the reform that most of us know that we really need to do. And we put proficiency in the corner. Not really for any bad reasons. I mean, I did it for 2 years too. And I learned about proficiency in my teacher school, so my teacher college. So I didn't even really have an excuse. But this is why. Most teachers teach the way that we're taught because y'all know as well as I do that there is so little preparation for as soon as you get into the battleground that is the classroom. There's so much else going on. How could you possibly have time to teach in a way that requires you to do some pretty different things, right? Also, let's not lie, I hear this all the time. We've been burned before. How many times has your district, or you've gone to a training or whatever it might be, but something has been rolled out to you that sounds like this new glamorous fancy idea? You do it for 2 or 3 years and then the next thing comes out. A lot of teachers in the world language space really think that comprehensible input is a fad or a trend that is just going to kind of, fizzle out into the wayside. A lot like the whole audiolingual method did in the 80s, like they think it's just going to fizzle out. I don't blame you. I mean, we've all experienced that. But the difference between proficiency is that proficiency is the entire umbrella. It's not really a specific method. Proficiency is actually dozens of different methods that you can use. It's just not present, practice, assess. Do y'all know what I mean by that? And I want to remind you that the idea, and this presentation is not about research because we go really in depth into all of the research into practical proficiency, but what you'll learn if you join us in practical proficiency is that this research for proficiency is not actually new. I mean, a lot of these studies go back as early as 1958 with something called the WUG study. But teachers, we don't have the time or the money to access research. I mean, who reads research in their spare time? Well, I do because I like research, but I did it during the summer, during like my psycho days where I used to spend 70 hours a week doing work and reading PD books on the beach while I should have been with my family. Like it's not naturally built into our workday. And even though it probably should be, we're not really reading the right research at the right time. So it's also really hard to make research practical. So we don't have a lot of access to it. Not to mention a lot of research is expensive to get to. I mean, have you ever tried to be a member of all of the ACTFL everything? It's expensive. So we don't have a lot of access to it. So it's really easy to just kind of put it off. Like you have so many other things to worry about. So I want you to understand that it's not really completely up to you to do all of this on your own. And I want you to understand where that hesitancy comes from in the field. It has nothing to do with actual proficiency itself. It has to do with just the nature of the difficult field that we are in and the lack of access to research that we've got. But here is a little gem that I want to keep in mind for you that's really, really relevant to virtual learning, and especially for keeping your kids somehow 6 feet apart in your classrooms. It just hurts my heart to watch teachers measuring their desks for this. But this is a piece of research that's really going to help you. Guess what? Interaction is only necessary for L1 acquisition, not L2. I know, doesn't that blow your mind? But that's a really powerful piece of research that I wish that every teacher knew. It's so simple, but it's so powerful. And to give you an example of this, have you ever heard of people who learn a language based off of watching TV? Like there's this kind of powerful American rags to riches myth that people who come to America and are trying to learn English, like they'll just watch TV all the time and they'll eventually pick it up. It's actually true. You can do it. It's really hard, but you can do it because you don't actually need interaction to develop proficiency in an L2. I mean, what level you can get to is questionable, but keep this in mind for your classrooms. Please do not pull your hair out this year trying to put in lots and lots of interaction into your classroom, because what your students actually need is tons and tons of input. They don't need to interact with each other. They need input. The interaction part is good for just the learning in general, the whole Vygotsky principle. But in terms of just language acquisition, we can't teach perfectly this year. It's not possible. So rest easy knowing that you don't have to interact with them as much as you think. Lesson number 2, more input, less output. That's right, Anna, especially in lower levels. Number 2, this is where I'm different from every other teacher that you're going to experience. Proficiency is easier. It is. I've done both. Proficiency is easier. It's easier for a lot of reasons. And it's easier if you do it in the right order. I've definitely made proficiency a lot harder for myself when I first tried it, but I finally figured it out and got into a groove after I started doing professional curriculum work. That's when I really started figuring it out, because getting your curriculum nice and tight is actually how you do this. So here's how you make this happen for yourself and not put proficiency off until next year. Look at your curriculum, spend 2 hours doing this. It's only going to take you 2 hours, and it will completely change the trajectory of your classroom. You don't even have to change anything about your teaching practice. Ready? Switch around the order of your already existing units or topics to match the orders of acquisition. We go really in depth into orders of acquisition and practical proficiency. It's a study by Roger Brown. If you want to look it up, I'm pretty sure it's 1970. Roger Brown, orders of acquisition, just put your curriculum in that order. Then you're already naturally going with what orders of acquisition means is there is a particular order that we as language learners actually pick up on certain topics. So for example, we don't learn regular present tense first, even though that's usually what's taught in level 1 as the first thing because we think it's easier. That's not what learners learn first. Your brain will pick up on other things before that, so why not naturally follow that pattern? Look up the orders of acquisition. Something also very easily that you can do is adjust your rubrics. This might take you longer depending on how finicky you are and how much attachment you have to work with departments or whatever school you're in and all that jazz. Change the goals of your assessments. One of the easiest ways that you can switch to proficiency in the least amount of time is switching out your assessments. So what I mean by that is instead of testing for explicit knowledge about language features, for example, we're going to have a running idea of reflexives for this presentation because I'm going to show you an example later. Instead of actually testing your students about how well they can manipulate reflexives, how well they can manipulate all of that morphology and verb endings and all that good stuff, ask them how well they understand them. If you give them a text that is, for example, what I used to always do in my district is we had this IPA that was a blog post about somebody's daily routine. And what they had to do was give true false questions about what that person did during their daily routine. Like, did they shave in the morning or did they shave in the evening? Change the goals of your assessments. Make it less about whether they know how reflexives are formed and whether they can understand what the reflexives are actually conveying. Also, this one really makes your life easier. Cut down on content and focus on repetition. Hi, Russell. Cut down on content and focus on repetition, meaning, holla, your life's about to get a lot easier. Take the units and the content that you already have and look at how can you tackle the same information through a different lens. So what I mean by that is, research-wise, your students are going to need at least 100 hours of contact with past tense. I know, right? Just regular past tense, even with clues, with things like hier or ayer for my Spanish friends. Yeah, they need 100 hours of contact with it. So if you have 2 quarters or a semester that has past tense, subjunctive, and imperfect all together in one, find a way that you can cut down on subjunctive and just make it more about, okay, like if I have to teach subjunctive, can I just instead make it about, do they understand subjunctive? And you're gonna have to get yourself in a little bit of good trouble here. I know I certainly did that. I had a very supportive department, but they certainly asked me to make sure that they were ready for the next level, even though, let's be real, like the students couldn't even speak in Spanish 3, so I don't even know what that meant. But they wanted me to cover like some subjunctive stuff in level 2, and I just didn't do it because I knew it wasn't good for my students. This is why I went to the principal's office. I did stuff like this. But if you're not comfortable with doing that, like just make it so that could your assessments just be a little different? Could you do less of that concept that you know they don't really need at that level and repeat more of that past tense in level 2? Could you go over that concept more in a different light? Could you maybe talk about what you did with your friends last week and make that an entire conversational unit? Could you talk about what your favorite music concert used to be before COVID and talk all about like before COVID I did this and now I do this, and do the whole like let's talk about past versus present and review present tense verbs again, because y'all know they're going to need that. Cut down on content and repeat things. It's honestly less work for you and it's better for your students. That's what I mean by proficiency is easier. And the next part of proficiency is easier is that what you're really doing is that you're not switching to a whole new teaching method in this idea. You're actually, because I am not a TPRS teacher. I am not the kind of person who used to like do a lot of work with novels. I love novels, but it wasn't the entire focus of my class. What I did that made me a proficiency teacher is I ruthlessly cut out material and I taught with a bunch of rich input. That's really what made me a proficiency style teacher. That's what I did. I switched my focus in class from explicit knowledge, meaning that I threw away all of my multiple choice grammar tests, and I started to include more tests that has to do with linguistic competence. Linguistic competence is just the idea of how do your students function in an actual linguistic task? Can they actually order a meal at a restaurant? Can they understand you when you speak? Not like my dreaded Spanish 2 final where none of my sweet babies could understand what I was saying. I switched from trying to get them to memorize facets of language, like can you tell me the difference between when you use ser and estar, and giving them passages where those two things were used and having them tell me things about it that showed me that they understood it. That's really the difference. And honestly, that's higher level thinking and harder to do. It's actually higher up on Bloom's. It really is. Proficiency is just what students can do with the language. That's why it's not really a specific method. So let's go back to this idea of, in concrete terms, what this means is that no matter what method that your school is opening with, whether you've got a hybrid model or whether you've got a completely remote situation or whether you're completely in person, this is what you're changing. You're not changing everything about your teaching style. What you're doing is instead of asking your students to memorize and conjugate reflexive verbs. I mean, you can do that. That's an important part of language learning, right? You do that for like 10 minutes. But what you spend the rest of your 2-week unit on is describe your daily routine. Make it about those can-do statements. If you're a teacher from America, we have teachers from all over here today, right? So it's not just actful. We're looking at lots of other different ideas, but that same concept that we're looking for, what can your students do with that knowledge of reflexive verbs? Like, okay, they can conjugate, but what does that even mean? What are they going to do with that? And you will find that when you switch, your students that had trouble conjugating are actually going to be the students who do the best in proficiency. I saw this in my own classroom. And once again, there's no such thing as a purist, really. I had a really good conversation with AC Quintero about this, is that you only really need to provide the deliverable. It's a student who can speak and understand the language. It doesn't really matter how you do it. We're not here to burn the proverbial filing cabinets. We're not here to become TPRS wizards via Zoom overnight. Like, if you're already there, that's amazing. But it's not going to be something that you'll be able to just jump right into. It's something that takes a couple years to really build up to. And if you're trying to get on that proficiency train, like just jump on it and work with it as you're moving. It's not something you need to be a master at right away. Also, students don't really like that kind of shift right away anyways, because it makes them feel like you're kind of very out there. That makes them very nervous. It does. Because I did that once and they were like, oh, can you please give us back the verb charts? Like, they got a little nervous when I went all, hey, we're going to do something really different. They did not like that. Your students are not going to want big surprises right now. You don't even have to make some sort of big announcement about it. You just need to get practical. Ernie agrees. We're living in quarantine life, so my dog's here with the presentation as well. So here are 5 ways that you can get practical. Cut down on your vocab lists. Reorder your units or topics. Leave space for recycling. Use comprehensible materials. I need to move this out of my way so I can see the last one. Oh, this one's really important. Fluency Matters. Do y'all know what program that is? It's amazing. Fluency Matters is my jam. It is so amazing. It's a place where you can get online comprehensible readers. It is so good. Y'all are going to love it. That really saved my life during everything that happened in March. And here's a little bonus tip for you too. The untapped potential of digital resources for teaching comprehensively is seriously unreal. It's unreal. It's not a setback, because what you can do with digital resources, if you're teaching remotely or even just if you're in an in-person environment, you can scaffold the input so much because you only have to make that resource once and you get to you get to send it to all of your students. You have so much more control over what language is in that resource. And it's much easier than trying to come up with a ton of input and language on the fly. It really helps your students to interact. You have so much more control over that. So doing this digitally is not a setback. And this is tip number 4, and this is honestly the most important one. Proficiency is naturally a culturally responsive teaching method. And this is not just research, although it is definitely backed up by that. This is my own experience. The power of novels and conversations and naturally fluid classes where you plan less and you talk with your students more. Your students have more voice because they're able to actually interact with the language more. And stories is one of the most compelling way that you can teach anything, and it just grabs them instantly and makes students that don't have a voice in school, it brings them into the conversation. It also, when you teach with proficiency, it completely levels the playing field, because the research shows that every student is equally capable of learning a language. There's no such thing as a student who is infinitely more adept at learning an L2 than other students. There are some factors like motivation, that is true, but there's not this huge gap like there is in other classes because everybody is starting from scratch. And so we are really missing out on a huge opportunity to reach all of our students, especially our students of color, if we are not taking the opportunity to use what is already in our wheelhouse of using stories. And frankly, this is something that we all need to sit down and have a real conversation about. But the teacher-centered model of present, what I mean by that is like you put up a PowerPoint of like the features of language, like this is how you make sure that it's masculine, feminine, masculine, feminine. Let's go practice masculine, feminine, masculine, feminine. Now let's assess masculine, feminine, masculine, feminine. It only allows student success for those who are already well-versed in the game of school. It really does. When I switched to proficiency, all of my students had more equal access to success. Everybody's grades went up, not because I taught differently, because I used different systems that brought everybody to the table. It was a more culturally responsive method that more people were able to get on board with. So it didn't have anything to do with me. It leaves a lot of responsibility on the system and not on you. It's not your responsibility anymore to take on all of that baggage of like, how am I going to fix this incredibly broken system that is education? When you choose this already culturally rich idea of teaching with conversation and stories that's naturally engaging, you already A, have to do less work, and B, you're bringing all of your babies to the table. It's so powerful. It's so powerful. And in a time where you're lacking connection with your students, this is exactly what they need. They want to hear stories, they want to hear from you, and they want to see themselves in the stories of other people through their own language. Because y'all know as well as I do, you know that great Nelson Mandela quote that when you speak to a man through a translated language, you speak to his head, but when you speak through their own language, you're speaking to their heart. And this is exactly what they need. This is going to reach their heart so much more when you're able to actually speak to them more in that language. It's really powerful. So I know you're thinking to yourself, okay, I need in on this because I can attest to the power of this. And I know that you need in on this too. So here's what I'm inviting you to formally. This is an invitation from yours truly to a really powerful community of like-minded teachers who believe the same things as you. They want good vibes. They want culturally responsive teaching. They want an easier teaching experience, especially in light of all the things that you're facing this year, like how on earth you're going to teach with a mask, or how on earth you're going to get more interaction when you have to keep your kids 6 feet apart. Stuff like this is going to help you. You can still do excellent proficiency-based teaching if you have a guide and a community to help you. And you can still go home on time this year. I have done it. I did this method all last year and I went home on time, even with my own health crisis and even with everything that was going on in the world. And I know that you can do. And it honestly made my teaching better. And so this is what you get if you decide to join us in Practical Proficiency, is you get 9 weeks of classes with information that's just like this. Like this is a sample of what was involved in module 2. And you also get, it's actually really 10 modules because you're also getting 2 bonus classes. I told you one about AC Quintero, about teaching with novels. And we also have on deck, Naylon Taylor is going to teach us how to use digital escape rooms, which is going to be so cool. And we're also doing live classes every week where the same thing as this, if you can't catch the live, because I know we have an international audience here today. What's up, internationals? You can catch the replay of that class. But the reason we do live classes is because it's going to grow with you. That community is going to help tackle each new challenge as it comes along with you in 2020. You're facing so much this year. And I believe that this, in Practical Proficiency, is the support that's going to help get you there. People are going to ask a lot of you this year. They already are. So with this, you can learn how to still teach with excellence and leave on time every day. So I hope that you loved this class. And if you are into this, I hope to see you in Practical Proficiency. This is how you can get there. And I will leave a link for you to join as well. Enrollment closes on Sunday, so you got to get in on it because we're starting right next week. So I got to know who's in it to win it. You can go to lalibrelanguagelearning.com/join. And I'll leave a link for you as well. And I wrote down that I need to, see, this is why I wrote it down. I'm glad I did that. I'll send the replay as well for the other class about how I went home on time every day last year. And I will also put a link to this in there as well. So hello to all of my friends who are here today. Thank you so much for joining me. This was such a treat to interact with you. And thank you to everybody who's also going to be watching this on the replay. I got just flooded with emails of people who wanted the link to this class. So I can't wait to see what you think of it. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to sign off and let y'all get to your beautiful lives, but I'm really grateful that you are here. And I hope to see you in our live class next week in Practical Proficiency. Bye, y'all.